Give it another few seconds as the audience builds here. All right, welcome. Welcome to PAC's session on marketing and communication strategies in uncertain times. I'm Dean Miller, the president and CEO of PACT, and I want to recognize and thank Broadpath, a longtime PACT member and supporter, for their partnership in this program, which will last about an hour. We have a format of lightning talks covering a number of topics, including content marketing, media relations, and email marketing. We'll have time at the end for some final questions, and we'll talk about etiquette throughout for getting questions answered. So we will intersperse questions along the way as we can. In terms of our panelists, we welcome this morning Janelle Kozyra, who is the Director of Content Marketing at longtime PACT member and supporter Sidecar. Brian McKenna, the VP of Strategic Partnerships at DMI Partners. And last but certainly not least, Gretchen Roede, again, longtime supporter of many entrepreneurs in this region and nationally as President and CEO of Broadpath. Webcast etiquette. Everyone is on mute with no video. Please use the Q&A window to ask any panelist questions. Questions will be taken again with each segment and answered throughout, and we'll do our best to cover any additional questions at the end. This is a recorded session. We will share this session along with slides, so no need to take notes. We will be monitoring those questions again throughout and responding as possible. The chat window is also available for any messages. If you want to privately message Danielle Pinto, the PACT host, or anyone else, you can do so as well. We are ready. Let's kick it off. Gretchen, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Before we get started, I just wanted to make sure that we made a note related to messaging. We're not going to have time to talk about messaging today, unfortunately, maybe some other time, but I wanted to just take a moment that before you're spending any dollars on the types of things that we're going to be talking about today, that you've really nailed the messaging foundation first. And I think that also becomes really important when you are in a situation where things are changing. Certainly we're going to be talking about COVID and the COVID period today and the crisis that surrounds that. Making sure you're being true to your foundational messaging is going to be very important, and that with a lot of intent, you may change or modify that. So finding the formula that you like, there's lots of formulas out there. Various companies and agencies, et cetera, have their process. Broadpath offers something called Message Check. In Message Check, we examine and do a reality check on business objectives, buyer personas, the competitive analysis, and important to us in earned media, the market dialogue. And then we create a message map, corporate narrative, and also some message training, so employees and stakeholders are singing all from the same hymnal that's been created. Another great resource I'd suggest to you if you feel like you need to develop or need to refresh your messaging is Donald Miller's book, Building a Story Brand. Again, it's very close to our heart as public relations and content marketers because of the approach he takes to looking at messaging and positioning in a story framework. So our little disclaimer before we get started on all of these interesting ways that we're going to be talking about content marketing, media relations, and email marketing. So with that, let me kick it off and send it over to Janelle from Sidecar.
Thank you, Gretchen. I appreciate that. It's great to be here today, everybody. I'm going to start casting right now. Okay. So as promised, I'm going to take a closer look at content marketing strategy during this time of COVID-19, and also just for greater context today, for those of you who aren't super familiar with Sidecar and our audience, we are a marketing technology company. We work with the retail industry only. Our audience is digital marketers within these retail organizations. So essentially, I have been a marketer marketing to other marketers, which has been a very interesting and insightful way to go about my own day-to-day. So the agenda of my session, I want to cover three major aspects of content marketing and in light of the past couple months: storytelling, channels, and what I call your North Star. The best practices that I think ring true whether we are going through a pandemic or not. So let's kick it off first with storytelling. The goal here, as you think about the dynamic nature of this pandemic, is to be able to shift your storytelling to align with rapid change. And the way I'm going to start talking about all of these aspects is I want to give an anecdote of how we at Sidecar have handled some of these facets, and then move into some takeaways that I think other companies, especially in B2B and in technology, can take away. These are not necessarily perfect. I'm not saying that these are like the paragons that you need to aspire to, but I hope that they are inspirational and that they're ideas for the folks out there. So, storytelling. How did we start to shift our storytelling to align with the rapid change and how things were unfolding so quickly, going back to March? We started with a survey. We surveyed our customers. We also surveyed our internal teams that are externally facing, so sales team and customer success team. And we asked just a handful of open-ended questions along the lines of, what questions are coming to mind for you as these events unfold? What are some of the challenges that are top of mind for you? And then again, kind of tweaked that question and framed it up like for the sales team and for the customer success team in terms of, what are you hearing from our customer base? What are you hearing from our prospect base? So that we could get information from a couple different angles. And that was how we were able to measure our audience's information needs right off the bat. This was all happening the first week of the lockdown. It was really key in how we could understand the concerns, the questions that were coming up, and also the tone around it, because you could glean insights into sort of the connotation of how we were getting these responses, and that really positioned us to take our next step. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what that next step was, but I want to pause and just kind of examine the act of doing this survey and some of the lessons that I think other people could take away from that example. So again, the goal here is shifting your storytelling to align with rapid change. So how to do this? Number one, let your audience's information needs guide your storytelling. This isn't about pushing your products and your services. This is about your audience's true needs in a time of urgency and a time of uncertainty. Extend this principle to your messaging, your positioning, your business objective. Let it be guided by your audience. Closely related to point number one is point number two. Don't assume that you already know all of your audience's information needs. Just because you have personas, which are instrumental, they are a baseline at a time like this. This is an unprecedented moment. Dig deeper, understand what your audience's information needs are in the here and now. And number three, this is a tip that I would say is a little bit more in hindsight, but I would encourage you to take it with you the next time there is an urgency situation or a situation that just has mega mainstream appeal. Realize that your first content marketing activity is really important. So choose it quickly, yet wisely. And the reason I say that is because when there is such mainstream attention on a subject matter, the content competition ramps really quickly. You've got all of your competitors, digging in and trying to get in on it very, very quickly. So it's important to strive for some sort of first comer advantage in the way that you help your audience. And that's why immediately we went to survey, we went to understanding our the information needs of our audience, and then move to our next step, which brings me to the second section of my presentation today, which is channels. The goal around channels is to be able to match the right story to the right channel. So what we did, as I mentioned, we ran a survey. a few different surveys, customers, customer success team, and our sales team. And then we use those findings to run a live Q&A broadcast. This was a broadcast that we assembled very rapidly. This was happening, I think, the second week of our quarantine. We assembled a handful of our more seasoned subject matter experts, people who are very used to being on the front lines and getting the hard questions. We put together a handful of slides for this that was just covering some of the major trends that we were seeing taking place in the market. We went through that in maybe 5 minutes, and then it was open. It was on the fly Q&A from our audience. Was there some risk in taking an approach like that? Sure. Because you don't always know what you're going to get asked, and you can't kind of tuck behind the wings and talk internally before you give your externally facing answer. But we really I think took the right steps to mitigate that risk in doing that survey. For instance, we had a good sense of what questions we were going to get asked. We already had formulated our thoughts on how we would respond to them. We had the right people on the line. And we were able to promote it really quickly. We didn't overthink any promotion. We just got it out there because this was the moment of being really direct and being very helpful and truly being a service to the industry. I would say that an example like this is really where the term authenticity in content marketing actually lives out. I think that's a term that gets thrown around a lot. And there's some hyperbole around it, but this is what I would say is truly authentic, truly a service to the industry, truly putting your audience's needs first. This was 100% audience driven. And so that was a key, I think, example of matching, again, story to channel. The channel being, sort of a rapid turnaround approach to a webinar. The other example I want to share with you is orchestration. Orchestration meaning empowering your internal teams to help you distribute content and distribute your messaging. So what we did in this case was, again, thinking about rapid turnaround and being a true service to the industry. A popular way that a lot of other companies in Sidecar space in engaging with our audience kind of historically and especially now is to leverage our customer data in aggregate and report on trends that are happening, in the space that we're working in. So again, our audience is digital marketers in retail. They have responsibility for managing their paid ads on channels like Google and Facebook and Amazon. And that's really Sidecar's sweet spot. So we have all of that ad performance data. And when we aggregate it, we can come up with trends in click-through rates and clicks and impressions, revenue, orders, all sorts of things that we leverage often to tell the story of how trends are shaping up in the ad space within retail. Our competitors are doing similar things. And so what we saw coming out in the market was other competitors who were spending seemingly quite a bit of time composing very beautified content pieces around what was happening, charts and data and analysis. And, we took a step back and said, why do we have to spend all the time on content production right now? Let's bypass that entirely. We will do the data analysis ourselves. However, we're going to turn all of that into stats and talking points and orchestrate it, empower our sales team, our customer success team, our press team with these talking points and stats, and take that to market. And that was how we were able to get this information out there very rapidly. And these stats and talking points, they're living in a Google Doc, and they are continually updated as the weeks have been unfolding and have been a popular tool for all of our teams to be using. So let's take a step back again and examine some of the lessons to learn from these examples. Again, here the goal is to be able to match a story to the right channel. Point number one to keep in mind is to communicate on channels that support rapid turnaround. These events are unfolding as we speak. Things are changing day by day. So think about channels that let you be very quick in how you distribute content. So orchestration, media relations, social media, podcasts, all the quick turnaround channels that let you get information out there quickly. These channels are all a part of our repertoire normally, and especially during this pandemic. Number 2, flip seemingly long turnaround channels into rapid ones. That's how we went from a webinar to a live Q&A broadcast. So a webinar is normally a multi-week process. You know, you spend a few weeks promoting it and driving your audience to get there, all this time on your slides. Bypass all of that and go to live Q&A broadcast, and then all of a sudden a webinar becomes a rapid turnaround channel too. Number 3, zig when everyone else zags on the obvious channels. And I'll call out email here in particular, and I know we have a lot of other great content to come in this webinar on email. One thing I'll say that's just, I think, especially relevant to the B2B audience, the tech audience, I mean, email is one of our key channels. This is, I think, a moment where you have to really be circumspect about avoiding exhausting your audience when all of these other companies out there in your space might be also reaching out to the same people with similar messaging. I mean, as soon as I can remember, even for myself, as soon as everything started to unfold, I was getting emails from all sorts of content marketing vendors, companies I haven't heard of, companies that maybe I heard of years ago, and they're coming out of the woodwork now, and they're just trying to reach out to me, and it just felt like, you know, just totally turns you off from listening to any of that messaging. So just be very mindful to avoid exhausting your audience on email. So for us, for instance, we have purposely not used email to message things like, here are your COVID-19 resources, and welcome to the new normal. That has not been a part of our mix at all. Instead, we have used email to promote our live Q&A broadcast. We used it to send the participants the recording at the end. And we've also been using email to communicate with our audience on matters beyond COVID-19, other matters that are still important to them this year, and matters that are still important to our 2020 content marketing plans. Okay, and this is my third and kind of final section. Beyond what I've said, you know, over the past few minutes, there is always your North Star, and this is your best practices that should ring true no matter what environment we are facing. And the goal here is to trust in those best practices. So I want to share a few that I think are particularly important at a moment like this. First of all, find the sweet spot of a great story. That is the combination of 3 elements: something you care about, something your audience cares about, and something you can add value to. This is always going to be the way to find the great story and the way for you to really focus on what you are an expert in as a company, and also putting, again, your audience needs first. Number 2, bake in chaos time. And I'm sure the pandemic has felt very chaotic for a lot of us, just by nature of it. But take a step back and remember that chaos time is normal. Chaos time is a part of always, you know, the efforts that you're working on in content marketing. And honestly, to me, chaos time is normal, and it signals that you're prioritizing the most critical business need at hand. We actually at Sidecar, we call it chaos time. We bake chaos time into our timeline specifically. It's in our process docs. It's in our project management. It's specifically a you know, tangible line item in how we go about our day. And that's how we have agility baked into what we do. So when it comes time for something where maybe the chaos elevates a bit, we already have that muscle to, you know, adapt and work with it. And third, best practice, operate with a shorter term lens, yet keep your ideal longer term plans in view. This again speaks to adaptability and agility, especially during a time of a pandemic when you can't really predict what's going to be taking shape in several weeks out, let alone a few months out. I mean, at Sidecar, we're used to doing quarterly planning, annual planning, but we also have a shorter term lens where we're looking forward just a few weeks, but keeping those longer term plans in view so that we can still aim to execute on them. And as I look back, and I put together our 2020 content marketing plans at the end of last year. There were quite a number of what I call big rocks that we distributed throughout 2020. And we have executed actually on basically all of them still. And that's because we have found ways to adapt maybe some of the ways that we're executing, but the big rocks have still happened. And that's because we've kept both that short-term lens and that long-term lens in view. And that about wraps it up. Those are the best practices that I would love to leave everybody with. And if there's any Q&A, I'm happy to take any questions.
I had one question come up and come sort of over to me directly via email. So curious, what was going back to that shorter term, longer term lens? How did you balance the existing content you were working with the new COVID content? Was there a percentage that you eradicated? Were there some things that were in the works that you had to put on hold? Were there things that you prioritized because they're going to be so important for holiday, which is fast approaching the retailer, point of view? How did you balance those things?
So that's an excellent question. And at the time of everything starting to take shape, we were in the middle of kind of actually coming to sort of in the home stretch, really, of producing our benchmarks report. This is our #1 best performing piece of content. We've been producing it every year for the past 4 years. A very, very important piece of content for us. It's a report that we put out in late March, and we run a webinar with it. And there's a whole slew of other content marketing activities and promotion that starts coming out, in April and moving forward. So as things started to take shape, the report was nearly complete. But what we did do in that piece, because this is a report that looks at, again, going back to the metrics that I was mentioning, this is a report that looks at 2019 ad performance based on our, again, customer data, looking at the trends that have taken shape, and then giving insights into how do you sort of take some of these insights into 2020. Well, so many things are changing in 2020, and a lot of the insights that we had put together in this report may be different. So what we did do, instead of scrapping that report or rewriting it, I mean, that just didn't make sense for us either. So we decided to insert an editor's note at the beginning of the report, and the editor's note had some messaging around how the trends here are still going to be important as we move forward. And although there is uncertainty here, there's still value in looking back on what we have known as like these trends that take shape, and keeping them in mind as we do act in more kind of timely ways. So that was, I think, a way to make that report feel more relevant and not be tone deaf when we did go ahead and publish it. And then there were promotions that we still continue to roll out. And again, that was a big rock for us. And it's important to us from a marketing perspective. It's important to us from just like the marketing to sales handoff perspective and what we need to generate in the pipeline to then, warm up for sales. So it wasn't really an option to just like not do that. But we found that the interest when we published that report, we did a webinar around that report. The interest in it has been nearly the same height as the interest that we were getting at this time last year when there was no pandemic happening. So still a
very interesting.
Yep.
Okay. Well, and we appreciate that, and I should full disclosure, we have the pleasure of working with Janelle and her team, and there's nothing better for a public relations team working on earned media placement than having phenomenal content to get started with. So I'm going to move on, and we'll talk a little bit about earned media, and I will ask Janelle to relinquish her. There we go. And I'll share my screen, get that started. Okay, so for those of you who don't know Broadpath, we are a strategic communications firm that works solely with brands and new innovative ways of doing things. So it's really technology and innovation. As I mentioned, we have the pleasure of working with Janelle and her team and do some content development ourselves for some of our clients. And this is our theory. Great content first that's compelling, relevant, that's going to move the buyer through their buyer's journey and into conversion. And that content feeds all parts of the marketing mix, including media relations, which is what I'm going to be talking about today. The other cool thing about that is media relations creates its own high credibility earned media coverage, and that earned content gets circulated back into all of those parts and pieces as well as down to the website and into the sales and nurture process as well. So that's how we kind of think about where media relations fits into the bigger scheme of things. And it drives its own little engine of content, high credibility third-party content into the marketing mix. So crisis is interesting. You often hear this saying that when written in Chinese, the word crisis is composed of two characters. One is danger and the other is opportunity. This is a lie. It is not true. You can go online and learn about the fact that that's not actually accurate. I'll leave it to Chinese language experts to explain that to you. But it's enticing for a reason, because there is this sense as a marketer and in communications that there's the crisis response that might be going on, but there's also this opportunity to contribute in a positive way to what you want to be doing and the conversation that's going on in the category. The nice thing about communicating in a crisis, and we won't belabor a lot of this, is there is great thought and practice behind how to manage communications during a crisis period. And I will say I've done a lot of crisis work, and it is tried and true. First, centralizing and developing a response team. You should have a captain of your communications response if you're working in a crisis environment. There should be one center of truth, one place the story is being developed and pushed out from. It's also really important that you segment your stakeholder groups. The conversations you're having with employees versus customers versus shareholders versus the community are going to be different, but they must be in concert. We may be talking to employees multiple times a day where we're only speaking with shareholders once a week. And speaking of frequency, one of the rules that I've learned and appreciate best about crisis communications is being regular and predictable about your communications. We would have press conferences related to an oil spill, and we would say the next press conference we will be giving you new information at 3 p.m. Eastern time today. It helps provide comfort to the people who are listening and want to know and following how progress is happening during a story. And my other great rule, I think, from a crisis standpoint in my observations and certainly in the practice of crisis is speak of what you know. If you're not sure, if you're not clear, don't guess. Say, this is what we know at this time. One of the things that we fall back on a lot in crisis communications is how things should be working, the normal process, the way viruses generally work, the way crisis response normally goes. And those are important pieces of information that you can provide when you are really lacking information and don't know where things might be going in the process of a crisis unfolding. So there's very good crisis communications. We're going to talk a little more about the opportunities and how to communicate during a crisis in a way that might help support your brand and drive your business ahead. So this is a very blunt but perceptive and popular quote from Rahm Emanuel. He's a guy from Chicago, so he thinks like this, I guess. But You never want a serious crisis to go to waste. This has now become a very famous quote. And you never really hear the second part of that quote, but what he's saying was that it's really important that you take the opportunity to do things that you may not have been able to do before. So we'll take a little bit of this guidance with a grain of salt and talk about earned media during COVID-19 specifically. So here are some of the things that we've seen. One, Newsworthy is newsworthy. It is fitting inside the COVID bubble, but if it is just generic and it is not well defined or well differentiated, a story is still going to fall flat. So go back to the fundamentals of what makes something newsworthy. Some of my favorite in here, certainly for the PAC team, is obviously gee whiz technology, new things, new approaches. We certainly see that covering the, whether it's how we keep things clean, how we keep separated from each other, how we do tracking, what type of vaccines and therapeutics are being worked on. That dominates a significant part of news coverage throughout the COVID crisis. The other thing is you need to balance what is appropriate. We had a inquiry come to us, and it was a company that said, hey, we've taken some of our manufacturing capability and we have turned it into making face shields for PPE. The question became, well, how much are you making? How and when will these PPE products be available? And ultimately, the other question came up, which is, are you only making PPE so you can keep the rest of your manufacturing organization working? And the answer to that was no comment, which made us believe that they were a little short on numbers, they were a little late to the game, and the question, if we were asking the question, why are you involved with this, then the media was going to be asking that question too. So we suggested to them that maybe they talk about it from a goodwill standpoint, that they were investing and getting involved with developing PPE, talk about it to their employees, maybe to stakeholders, but it probably wasn't something to take to the media. And that's one of the things that we're talking about here on this slide. What is appropriate? My Suburban Life happens to be a publisher that does a lot of community papers in and around the Chicago area. The story we're taking to them, or the type of angle on a story that we're taking to them, is going to be different than what the Chicago Tribune or the Chicago Business Journal gets, even though they're in the same community serving the same population. We're going to have something different for the Wall Street Journal out of that story, and then we're going to have something even more, specific and probably deeper for trade publications that may cover the category. DC Velocity covers distribution centers, which have been very hot, a very hot topic, very hot category. We're going to talk about that in a moment, and inbound logistics. So crafting what is appropriate for the story is important, both in walking the fine line between not being overly opportunistic and also making sure you've parsed the story out for the right audience. This is the other thing that we have to play, is what is in context. COVID-19 editorial cycle as of March 8th, this was an email we got back from a reporter in Cincinnati. We were pitching a local story for them, to them, and the answer was, while there is a novel coronavirus abroad in the land, other stories are going nowhere. It was, don't bring me anything if it doesn't have to do with COVID. So that was March 8th. It's pretty early on in the process. So one of the things that we've been looking at for all of our clients is who has a good COVID story and how can we create something around that. Boxware is a client we work with. They provide both voice and augmented reality solutions and analytics for the distribution center, distribution operations. This is where people pick product and make sure it gets out of the warehouse and onto a truck and out to wherever it needs to be. This has been a big topic, obviously, given the supply chain topics and shortfalls that have, and challenges that have been laid in front of us during the COVID crisis. Their messaging is optimizing operations, increasing profitability, and exceeding expectations. Every 2 years has done a great thing in investing in a survey that asks consumers what their expectations are for the holiday, as far as delivery, timeliness, accuracy, returns, and how all of that gets handled. For the past 10 years, every other year, Voxware has gone out and fielded this survey and has really become, this survey has become a real touchstone for the retail market and the distribution center industry to understand what to expect during the holiday. Well, with this beautiful track record, one of the things we've decided to do is to ask about what's going on in the COVID environment. How is COVID going to impact holiday 2020? So we're doing a little mini survey before our big survey, which comes out in September, just asking specific questions that relate to new attitudes, new behaviors that may be shifted or changed because of what's going on with COVID. The nice thing, we're asking 3 simple questions. We're putting it out in a consumer survey tool. We'll send it to everybody participating. Please answer the questions, send it around, give us your opinion on these topics. But what these questions give us is, it gives us current, in the realm of the current editorial cycle, legs for national business pitches, retail verticals, distribution center industry, and we're tagging these survey results with news from Voxware of a 60-day implementation promise. So because holiday is going to be different, because there's going to be more demands and different demands on the distribution center, Voxware can come in and do implementations to make sure that your distribution center is ready to take on these new challenges that are coming this year with holiday 2020. It gives us the ability to kind of pre-pitch what we will be pre-pitching the answers and what we find out from this survey ahead of time, so we have some stories ready to go, and then releasing it on June 25th, exactly 6 months before holiday. Our focus again is going to be distribution center, retail verticals, the trade publications that Voxware's prospects and customers pay attention to on a regular basis. And this is falling into their laps just as they're having to really worry about what holiday 2020 means to their organization. The other client that we're working with that has an interesting play here as it relates to COVID and the coronavirus is Quanaverse. Quanaverse uses artificial intelligence and machine learning to find financial crime in the banking system. So mostly it's money laundering. Their messaging is about cutting costs, reducing risk, and satisfying regulators. One of the things that we realized was we had an opportunity to be on trend with some stories related to COVID. First, we started to see that coronaviruses were challenging the ability to actually do money laundering investigations inside banks on a timely basis. Well, this is something that Quanaverse directly addresses. We also found that Quanaverse was sending the coronavirus was sending outsourced workers home. So a lot of this work and in the early investigation stages happens in India. The Indian workers got sent home. They didn't really have the resources at home or the infrastructure across the country to keep up. So bigger problems and bigger challenges for the banks. We then also saw an evolution of more crime, more bribery, more fraud, et cetera, happening under the confusion of COVID. The criminals were taking advantage of the situation. And we also heard from compliance officers that they were seeing this big increase in the number of alerts. So first of all, their people were scarce and their problem got worse. So we worked with Quanaverse, who decided that they were going to develop a new adaptation of one of their existing products to help address the scarcity during COVID-19. We got a lot of media coverage around that. And we connected it to analysts and other associations that we've already been connecting the Quanaverse story with for webinars, et cetera. So that's one of the ways we were able to make sure that we had appropriate, timely, and how should I say this, really connected types of questions. So going back to the earlier question, email that we got from one of our reporters, now by April 28th, we had sent out this AI-powered COVID story about supporting banks during shortage of investigators. And we got this answer back, which is COVID-19 has been done a lot, so something new. So between May 8th and April 28th, we're starting to see that editorial cycle reemerge into start giving me new stuff, news stories. So important thing to keep a note on. So that is my notes on this. And what I'd like to do is hand this over to Brian to talk about the email and how email is working during the COVID and coronavirus changes.
Good. Thanks, Gretchen. Key moment of truth here. Let me make sure I can get my screen up here. Perfect. Wanted to quickly just introduce myself and DMI. So DMI is a full service digital agency. We're based right in Center City, Philadelphia. We've been around for 16 years. We offer a full suite of digital marketing solutions from search and social to comprehensive e-commerce management. But two services where we have really found a niche where we offer best-in-class end-to-end services are surrounding affiliate program management and end-to-end email marketing. So that last piece, email marketing, is the piece I really focus on at DMI and wanted to give a little bit of information on. So wanted to start off with just kind of giving a sense of what we're seeing in the marketplace for email. Two big takeaways that we've seen is that people are still subscribing to receive emails. DMI's clients have acquired over 3.8 million new email subscribers through us in March and April, which is actually a 46% increase over January and February. So we're seeing the appetite for people to sign up to receive information. We're seeing a lot of that growth specifically in businesses that have been heavily impacted by either their distribution channels or to demand, and people are looking for updates to know when product might be available or where they can purchase. We also are seeing subscribers engaging with email more. So on average, we're seeing open rates increase by 14% since March 14th, which we've kind of set as a date where everyone kind of went into some of the shelter in places and businesses went to work from home. We also wanted to share a survey by one of the bigger email service providers, Klaviyo. They're doing a really good job of surveying their audience of customers in the marketplace in general. And what they've seen is that 55% of brands have increased their investment in email more than any other channel. And really, the only other areas where we're seeing significant increase in that investment is other owned channels. So where you understand or you're capturing your audience and getting them to take some action. So I wanted to give you a sense of what we saw brands do ahead of COVID-19 that they're able to take advantage of. I think the first and biggest one is that we saw brands spend a lot of resources capturing market share of first-party owned opt-in subscribers. This is true for both our B2C and our B2B clients. And really how a lot of our clients are looking at is one of two ways. One, it's either prospective clients that they want to be communicating to on an ongoing basis as part of that sales process. And then also thinking through, of our existing customers, which percentage of it do we have them in our database to be able to send ongoing messages. To Janelle's point about, making sure that you're communicating effectively, I definitely would agree with one of the things we saw well is, that the clients that are being able to message effectively today are ones that had really invested in building ongoing email engagement with their customers. It does very much ring true or ring hollow if you are all of a sudden starting to send a bunch of messages to people that you've never communicated through that channel with before. So the clients that are doing well with it now really did build that investment of sending ongoing messages and building up that relationship with their customer base ahead of time. Another area where clients spend a lot of resources ahead of time that they're capitalizing off of is developing segmentation and progressive profiling practices so that they really understand their email database. We work with a local company that sells a large number of products, and those products really kind of run the gamut. Some of them, there's an abundance of resources and they're not able to sell them off the shelves, whereas other products they can't find. And so what those clients have really done a really good job with is understanding this segment of our database is really looking for updates on this product. They're primarily a purchaser of these products. How can we message to them effectively and much differently than our segments in our database where we might not have the product available, and obviously you need to communicate much differently to them. We also have a client in the cruise line industry, and obviously them knowing who their reliable customers are that are loyally going to buy. You can potentially start sending promotional messages to them much earlier than somebody that you know less about or might not be as avid a fan of yours. And then from a B2B perspective, that's very integral as well, is just thinking through what are our clients' obstacles right now. Are they running into issues with their distribution, and how should I be communicating to them versus other clients of ours that are really looking to grow their business and capitalize based off of where they're positioned today. I think one of the things that we've always been working with our clients to figure out is can we build automations into your email process. So if somebody signs up to receive a white paper or sign up for a webinar, building out a flow of messages that go out to those subscribers. But obviously a lot of those messaging, we really recommend doing so in a way that you can quickly audit it and adjust. A good example is one of our clients in one of their welcome messages when somebody signed up to receive a white paper was something about popping champagne in their office. And, in our ongoing process of just kind of auditing those messages once everybody went from a work from home, that message really just didn't make sense. It could potentially have even come off negatively to a large chunk of their audience. So quickly being able to not only find those situations, but also be able to, as Gretchen mentioned, you want to really make sure you're nailing the messaging foundation, and that was a big component of it for our clients. And then the last piece is making sure that you're going through the process of making sure that the people that you're emailing are actually still engaging with your content. One of our partners, Fresh Address, who is really good at determining invalid emails, they estimate that around 8% of email addresses are retired year over year. So on any given year, 8% of your database that you've effectively been able to build up over time, that email may no longer be valid. So looking to replace that, but also thinking through ways that you can pull those people off the file as you've seen them stopping engaging. What we're seeing in terms of brands adjusting to the current environment, one of the big things is it really is important to communicate changes to the business. Email is one of the most effective and certainly one of the most cost-effective ways to do that, especially if you've done a lot of the work that we mentioned leading up to the current situation, so you know who in your audience want to receive different information. A really big example of this is we work with a number of restaurant clients having to shift a lot of their practices from a dine-in experience to a takeout and curbside pickup, that type of thing, and getting those protocols out to their audience has been huge. An element of that is also knowing, which of their restaurants they should be communicating and what the local practices might be for that specific region of the state or country. Another area where we're seeing our clients react well today is in a number of Janelle and Gretchen mentioned this, but going through and seeking feedback, learning from your customers. You can do that both implicitly and explicitly. We're seeing better engagement with any of the implicit surveys and profiles that we've sent out as a company, and our clients are seeing that as well. But also learning explicitly, if people are not engaging with the messages, it's really important to think through sending different content or maybe potentially stopping sending to that individual for the time being. So going along with that, people have different behaviors, whereas I had historically been much more of an early morning work before I got the kids off to school. I am in the new normal, or I've heard someone refer to it as the now normal, and much more of a work at night. And so a lot of my work is getting done after the kids are in bed. And so learning from your audience and adjusting. So when people are reading emails, making sure you're getting messages to people that matches their changes in behaviors, and having the systems to be able to pick up on those trends. Going along with that, speeding up learnings. I think going along with learning from your audience and asking them explicitly, thinking through, like, if a week follow-up on a after a webinar or a white paper download made sense in the normal world, maybe it's makes sense to slow that down a little bit and build a little bit less of a push to a lot of those markets. Or simultaneously, there might be areas of your business that people really need to react well today, and maybe you want to speed up some elements of that for different segments of your customer base. And then, really going along with everything that people have been saying today, is you want to make sure that you're sending the right message to the right customer segment, and really, even more important than sending the right one to the right person, you also want to make sure that you're not sending the wrong message, something overly promotional to somebody that really isn't in that mind frame today. And then the last piece, we just want to talk through what we're seeing in terms of brands that are preparing for rebound. A lot of work is being done on those flows and automations throughout their email, through what should this look like when we're coming out of, and as we start being a little bit more promotional with our business. Some of our clients are using this as an opportunity to build new flows into their system that they hadn't used previously. A lot of this, the path forward is very unknown. And so a lot of our clients are thinking through what are the different scenarios and how should we be adjusting based off of where we end up a month from now versus 2 months from now, that kind of thing. It goes along to what we were talking about in the very beginning, but much of our clients are realizing that they could have reacted even better if they had more of their market share within their email programs, and thinking through structures to make sure that acquisition is a reliable piece of their ongoing strategies for marketing. I think one of the other pieces that they're really thinking through is there are elements of their database that they have stopped messaging to or pulled back on their messaging because they've seen them stop engaging, and they're starting to think through, what is the right time to start reaching back out to those folks, and what is that process and that messaging, what should it look like? So spending a lot of resources thinking through that. And then the last piece is, a lot of our clients have learned a lot about their customer base, and so they're thinking through what are those lessons that we've learned, and can we build more personalization into our work so that we're sending even better messages based off of what we know about each individual subscriber. And I think that's everything I had.
So Brian, just a couple questions that popped up. You mentioned that some of your clients captured market share, before the importance of capturing market share before COVID. How did we all deal with this challenge of how we're getting people to opt in these days, yep, and being on the right side of the compliance for email marketing. Where are you seeing the greatest success before this started? And have you seen anything change while we've been in the midst of this?
So we've seen, where we've seen our clients have success, it varies by obviously the type of client of ours. B2C clients, they tend to have a lot of success on the social media, Facebook, and driving people to maybe offer them some sort of discount while on the site. For our B2B clients, it's leveraging some of the same tactics. So, utilizing LinkedIn to drive traffic to a landing page where people will need to enter their email to get access to a webinar, which is a great way to get people to enter the information, or a white paper, any sort of content that the teams are putting together, making sure that every point in time you can collect that information. The one thing that I would say that it has changed is that I think a lot of our clients are seeing more success with just being straightforward and asking people, prominently on the site to say, like, enter your email to receive updates based off of the current atmosphere, that type of thing.
Since we have a lot of B2B folks, oh, sorry, Dean. Since we have a lot of B2B folks on this particular group, the only other thing I guess I would ask you to comment on before we wrap up would be, have you seen some messaging during the COVID period that B2B clients have really resonated with? We've seen a lot of automation and things related to employee connectivity, both emotional and technical. Curious what you might have seen that's working in this B2B realm.
Yep, definitely. And, a lot of it has been focused around, updates to the business and wanting to make sure that people know that they're able to deliver the same level of service. But a lot of that goes back to like, what does your team look like? How is the team reacting? I think that is an element that has been really well received from our B2B clients is the, kind of like the updates on what our team is doing and successes that they've seen for other clients, that kind of thing in this new COVID-19 world. Does that answer your question?
Hey, Brian, I have one quick question before we wrap up. You talked about the churn of emails on an annual basis, and oftentimes it can be a very manual process to address. Do you have any tips, best practices for the automation of that process to stay updated with your list?
Yeah, it's obviously tough to say because each email service provider does it differently, but most of them have a good system today of building in some sort of mechanism of building into your segment. Has this person opened an email within the past 6 months or a year, or sometimes more quickly, depending on what you reliably see in terms of your engagement. So I think looking within the email service provider and seeing if there isn't a way to build that sort of rules into your list building for when you're sending out a message.
Great, thank you. Well, we are at time. I want to thank our panelists once again, Gretchen, Brian, Janelle, for your terrific insights. Again, this has been a recorded session. It will be shared. Feel free to pass it along to others, other peers, other people within your firms. Again, I want to thank Gretchen and Kevin and Broadpath for their partnership and support. We're excited to bring you timely information, and certainly marketing communications overall, but particularly in this time period, is really important. We have another number of upcoming programs listed here. Again, you'll see them in our emails as well from our email marketing. Again, our MedTech series, our digital health series, and our technology executive roundtable. We'll also be putting together and producing a program on going back to work and best practices in that regard. We will have an email survey. Please be on the lookout for that. Help us improve these sessions. Feel free to suggest additional topics. Again, we are thankful for your participation here, for your support as members, and look forward to speaking to you again soon. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Dean.